Yes, Your Honor, thank you. And if I may, I've got a presentation to follow along with, at least in part.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And, you know, as Your Honor is aware, this is a different scenario than we often find ourselves in this courthouse. And in a lot of regards, that's a good thing. But it makes this part of the process a little different. And I appreciate Your Honor, and I know that all of the victims' families in this case, and I feel confident that I can speak for counsel on both sides, that we appreciate your willingness to hear us all out on all of these issues and give us the time to go through all of these things so that you have a clearer picture about what actually happened, as opposed to, as we would often do in these types of cases, we would walk in, you just hear the guilty plea, we'd give you a 2-minute recitation, and then you're required to make a decision as to sentencing. And so I think it's beneficial for you to have been given a fuller picture by both sides. And when I sit back and I've thought about this case over the last 3 years or so, and over the last 2 weeks, and particularly this week, I don't want us to forget the people that were most affected by this. And I put them all up here, and it's been about a week until the end of the day today when we heard most of these people's names. And so I want to take a moment to remind Your Honor, not that I think you have forgotten in any way, but to give each of these people their moment again and remind you about James and about Lynn and Nicole and Gabe, little Layla even there, Susan, Mary, and Casey. Each of those people were walking about and going about their day-to-day lives that day on August the 13th, just like every other day. Day by day, things go by and you feel like nothing's ever going to change. And then in the blink of an eye, everything changed for those people and for the people that they left behind. And the thing that made it change was not some acne medication. It was the defendant's knowing, researched, well thought out, planned, decisive actions. This was not a youthful indiscretion. This is not the rare juvenile that is, or not the rare juvenile, he is the rare juvenile, I would submit to you, that has planned these things out. You heard the talk about brains and the juvenile evolution of the brain and where they are. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we continue down this path. But when you do that, we've heard all this discussion about context. Bear in mind where we are. The defendant has pled guilty to these offenses. This is not something where he's come in and says, from the jump street, I didn't know what I was doing. He pled guilty, and you have found and issued an order that premeditation and deliberation, there's evidence of that in this case. So I would argue, for Your Honor, and as I know you know, that's the only reason that we have to have this hearing, but keep that in your mind, because I think it's important when you look at the things that they have presented in their case that mitigate this. And the only thing that they've ever really pointed to, I would submit to you, is this idea of this depersonalization being the issue. They can latch on to the arguments that maybe he wasn't on these pathway to violence. It's irrefutable. He was on a pathway to violence. He was at the start of that and made it all the way on to the path of violence. He committed violence not once, not twice, not 3 times, 7 times that day. He terrorized an entire community for over an hour. To say that he was acting and didn't have a plan and know what was going on, I would submit to Your Honor, it is not believable when you look at the totality of the circumstances here. And so I want to start out and talking a little bit about something that the experts for the defense have raised. Dr. Corvin talked about it, and he said that his goal here was to find out why. That's not what his goal was, Your Honor. It's not what is supposed to be what his goal was. His goal was supposed to just be to give Your Honor some indication about the defendant's mental state. Not why he did what he did, but could he understand what he was doing? Why is something for us that we all want, we all hope to get at some point? The victims I know would love to have the answer to that question. The defendant's parents have asked from day one, why would he do this? The reality is we will probably never know why he did this. We do know that he did it. And I would submit to you, you know that he knew what he was doing when he did it. And the why is not the inquiry that this court is here to decide today. What you're here to decide at the end of this day is what is the appropriate sentence for what happened. Now sure, if you have why, that's something that you can consider. But it's like we tell jurors all the time, the motive doesn't matter. It can be helpful, but it's not dispositive. And so let's talk about what they have presented as why. And it's this drug-induced depersonalization. But where do they get this from? They get it from this idea of minocycline, their expert opinions, and I've put question marks beside that because I'd submit to you there is zero expert opinion that the defendant was actually suffering from minocycline depersonalization. The doctors never told you that was their expert opinion. If you really go back and look at what they said and then consider what the reports that you have been provided by them say, I would submit to you Dr. Corvin's don't really add up. He goes a lot farther in this courtroom than he was willing to go when he was actually reviewing the documents and formulating this opinion and providing it as was required in his testimony. And I'll talk to you a little bit in a moment about why I would submit a lot of his testimony is inaccurate when you look at the totality of the circumstances that were here. And I've already talked about this guilty plea and premeditation. But so Dr. Corvin, when you heard what he said here, he tried to say, what's the only reason I can come up with because I have discounted all the other things to my satisfaction. Well, when you read his report, this is the quote from the report. Mr. Thompson has no other known risk factors such as episodes, nor has he experienced any symptoms previously when he talks about this. And he says he is unable to offer an opinion to any degree of reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not he was experiencing symptoms on the date in question. In his report, he says, I can't even tell you if he experienced the symptoms that apply to this. In the courtroom, he tries to exaggerate upon that and say, oh, no, I'm looking at all this, and it's clear to me, essentially, when you look at how he responded to the questions, that he has this further opinion now. But when you dive into what was the basis of that opinion, you look at these things. And he says, well, he appeared to be in a trance and a zombie, or walking like a zombie, is what the witnesses said. Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper. Did he talk to any of those witnesses? No. He told you that words matter. And so we had that whole debate about zombies and are there different kinds of zombies and wouldn't it be helpful to actually know what somebody meant when they're telling you this, if you're going to base a medical opinion off of it? He didn't take the time to call the guy and ask him, hey, what do you mean by this? Ask the lawyers. Will you reach out to this person through the investigator? I need more information. Because he told you that the information in affects the information out. He says this zombie state, and we'll talk about, was the defendant actually walking like a zombie and appearing like a zombie, or what were they trying to say? You saw the videos. They speak for themselves. This is not somebody walking around like a zombie with their arms out. This is a person that is running. He is deliberate in his actions. He knows where he's going. Dustin Poole even told you, I believe it was, who's the one that said zombie, When he heard me, he spun around and pointed a gun directly at me, and they asked, did he have emotion? He didn't have any emotion? He said, oh no, he had emotion in his face when he was looking at me, and I was staring down the barrel of a shotgun from several feet away. He then moves on to the note and says that the note gives him great pause and concern. When you read that, his report, he talks about that date, and I would argue to you, he latches on. That's a big portion of what he is arguing in there that shows him that the defendant wasn't in the right state of mind at the time that this note was being written. He wrote the wrong date on it. Okay. Well, what do we find out when we come to court and ask him about that? Well, it wasn't the wrong date. He got bad information from counsel about what happened, and he based his decision off of bad information. Did he share that with you on direct? No. We had to bring that out of him. They entered in the report, which states in the report, he didn't amend that report in any way. The report was provided to you that included in it this information that this date affected his opinion on there. We had to bring that out of him that no, yeah, it had the wrong date, but that didn't really affect my opinion. Well, he sure latched onto it when he was writing the opinion. Calls into doubt the veracity of that opinion, or does he have a stated goal that he is looking for and trying to come in here to find a reason why and a reason to mitigate it for the people that have hired him, which I would submit to you, this is all a Hail Mary at this point, right? I would submit to you the evidence is clear and they're looking for a reason, looking for something to hang their hat on. It's 2 seconds left in the fourth quarter and they're down by 20. The Hail Mary doesn't matter at this point, I would submit to you, okay? So when you look at that, he doesn't tell you about the wrong date. He then says, well, the reasons in the note are really bizarre. They don't make sense. Okay, well, why? He wasn't overly concerned with the planet. I never saw that he was overly concerned about that, and that's the reason why I put that there. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, but other people have used that as a reason why, correct? Well, yeah, I've seen that before. Okay, and he actually did search that in his computer a couple of times at least, right? Yeah, he did. But that doesn't make sense. The reason that he killed James is because he says he's going to get in his way. He couldn't fathom that that was a reasonable reason for someone to write down in there as to why they would kill their brother. Okay. And even today, Dr. Sapia, she seemed, well, that doesn't make any sense. But when you look at the context of what happened and what's in that letter, does it not make sense? Every witness has told you James was a good kid, smart, athletic, well-behaved, no issues out of him. If the defendant has in his mind a fixed purpose, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to commit mass violence for whatever reason it is, and I'd submit to you it might have just been, and even when you look at his search history, that he just wanted to experience it, or he had some other plan, and this was just the first step of the plan. Well, if he's going to do that, he's got to get by Big Brother. And we all heard James is a little guy. You saw Austin's a little guy. James is bigger. We saw the pictures that were presented in this courtroom about it all. Is he going to beat him in a fist fight? No. And when you go back through and look at the search history, I'd submit to you, he's been planning, for years, months, how do I subdue somebody? Can I hit him in the head with a blunt object? What does it take to knock somebody out? What does it take for a .22 to penetrate the skull? If he's wanting to get out there, you've got this good brother that you know, by all accounts, is going to do everything he can to stop this terrible thing from happening. And we know how Austin had to dress when he walked out there to do it. He's come home, he's changed now, he's in all camouflage, he's got a rifle that's as big as he is, and a 22-pound backpack, and he goes to the front door. You don't think James is going to look at him and say, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing? put the gun away. This isn't what we do. You don't go out here and hunt in the neighborhood. It's going to take the gun away from him. So what does Austin decide to do? The only way that I'm going to be able to achieve my objective, and as we've heard from all the witnesses, he's a goal-oriented person. He does what he has to do to get to the thing that he wants to do. I have to kill my brother, even though we don't have a long-standing antagonistic relationship. I have to kill him to achieve my next goal. Sorry about it, but this is the way it needs to be. And so what does he do? He does exactly what he had researched. He shoots him in the back of the head, and then he cuts his throat, stabbing him and injuring his voice box, which we'll look at later. So does this note really not make sense? I'd submit to you that's them minimizing because they know, oh, this is bad for whatever this opinion that I want to have is, that I want to convince this court for my goal of trying to help this guy out so he doesn't get the stiffer sentence because he's the one that has hired me to come in here and do this.
Objection to hired.
Then they latch on to the structure.
I'll sustain the objection, but no further comment.
Then they move on to this idea of, well, it looks weird. It's disjointed. It's written weird. They're misspelled words. Okay. But then you go on and you look at his schoolwork. The handwriting looks exactly the same. There are misspelled words in the schoolwork. They're scribbled out parts. It's disjointed looking. It's the way he writes. He's a kid at the time in 2022 who's been doing computer work. We don't teach people how to have nice, neat handwriting and calligraphy as much anymore. I think that's a well-known fact. So I would submit to you that's not an issue here. He is acting as he normally acted at the time. These are not really signs that this is a person that doesn't know what's going on. And these are weak reasons to jump to the most far-fetched of excuses that even they would admit. Dr. Corbin said, on direct testimony, he looks at me and says, I admit it's very, very rare. Even to the point that he wasn't even considering this at first until he had removed all the logical reasons, I would say, that do exist from this, because those logical reasons don't advance the goal. So these are the things that he ignores. And he says, well, context and moderation matter. And we'll talk about that, but I have no concern about these violent search histories. None. It's so common. I watched Faces of Death many times. I did all these things. I see it every day. These students and people come in with looking at violent content. Don't disagree. How many of those people have acted on it, though? That's the context that we are here on. Is it a red flag that this person had consumed that much violent content, sought it out, and sought out specific violent content that relates to the thing that he goes and does later? If that's not a red flag to you, at least in hindsight, then I question that opinion. He says there's no ramping up. I would submit to Your Honor, go back and look at that exhibit. If you haven't already, you may have, but I would say pull up the Excel spreadsheet and scroll through those Google searches yourself. See if you think there's a ramping up that is going on. Because I would submit to the court, the searches as we get closer in time become more and more concerning. He doesn't mention the separation of the parents that are happening. And I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but it's certainly something that he does finally admit can be traumatizing to a family, especially one that they are all saying is such a close, tight-knit family, to realize, oh, very, very recently before this, the paperwork is being filed and we are moving forward with this separation. Does that have an effect on a person to think, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it now? I would submit to you the argument is yes, that it might. again, the context of this is that this is all looking at hindsight of a person that does go out and kill 5 people and shoot 2 others. They claim that he made several claims, I would submit to you, about the literature and the frequentness and the severity of the depersonalization as a result of minocycline. But when we dove deeper into that, I would submit to you those claims aren't really supported by anybody other than him saying it. The next doctor, even him, would say, and we went through those studies a little bit more in depth, and I'll talk to you about them again, but mainly focused on women. The very rare studies that even exist on this. I think at some point somebody talked about it might have even been Dr. Corvin, numerically insignificant, that was the term I think they used when describing the number of times that this happens. But that's what we want to hang our hat on, none of the red flags that we can see now in hindsight. And to say that there were no red flags to begin with, I would argue again is inaccurate. Now there may not have been any red flags that anybody saw, but I don't know how you can look at the evidence here, hear the testimony about this withdrawn young man who is on his phone and now knowing what he's searching on his phone and say, well, I feel comfortable that there were no red flags here. I'm not blaming his parents for that. They didn't know. And they didn't know in part because Austin had put on this brilliant disguise for everybody around him because he was a smart guy. He is a smart guy. He knew, better not make this public because somebody's going to try and stop me. And they don't want me to look at this stuff. I want to keep looking at these things, and so I'm going to keep them private. And what evidence do we have of that separate and apart from the internet searches? Well, we know that nobody ever went and saw what he was looking at, so he was able to keep that quiet. But then we have the chapstick container that has bomb-making material or designs, bomb-making recipes curled up in a tiny undescript chapstick container that he has concealed. Well, Dr. Corvin, do you have concerns about that? Nope. Doesn't rise to any level for me. We like violent stuff. Kids look that stuff up all the time. Okay, doctor. But do they then go and act on these things? Do they then go and act on these violent impulses to this degree? I would agree. People like to look at certain things, right? I mean, we look at violent movies, we play violent video games, and I'm not blaming those things necessarily. But when you pair those things with somebody who already has this goal or disposition to do something with it, that's when it becomes a concern, I would submit. They then tried to advance this theory and show why it would be more likely because they know it's numerically insignificant, this number of people who suffer from this side effect, by doing this DNA test. I would submit to you, if this had been a trial, you don't even let that evidence in front of a jury. That was an experiment that he created that day that is unproven, untested, and fails under every prong of the Daubert standard. As the gatekeeper, I would submit to you that you would have said, this doesn't get to a jury for them to hear this piece of evidence. But I know where we are, and so it's in, and we'll talk about it. This is testimony from a doctor who was very candid, I would submit to you, and said, I didn't know much about this thing before they brought this to me, so I did some research on it. Well, what does that mean? He went and looked up some articles online about it. Okay. And then he sent a DNA test off to a company that doesn't even test for that drug because I wonder why that drug doesn't do this to any significant level. This is the Hail Mary. And they look at it and they send it back. And he looks at the markers and he goes, oh, doesn't really say what we need it to say. So we're going to say, we need to do further testing to find out about this one genetic marker that we know affect a lot of drugs, but not this drug. And we're going to ignore this one marker that we know affects this drug's metabolism, because in the defendant, that marker's normal. So we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole to get to something through an experiment that doctor can't even give you an opinion on, because it doesn't exist. There are no studies to support any of this that they are saying until you look at the literature and what it says. Mostly, I think we heard maybe one guy, there was maybe a study that said something about that, was the best that we got from that suffered from this depersonalization at some point. At most, 40 people in one study, but we know 2 people, numerically insignificant, okay? We know that this is prescribed to millions of people over its course of its time from 1971 until 2026. And this is interesting to me because the numbers matter for Dr. Corvin and these other experts when they are talking about the internet searches. Well, he searched dinosaurs more than he searched mass murders. And counsel made a production to come up with a calculator and have Sergeant Pike go through and do the calculations to figure out what percentage of the search history was this versus dinosaurs and homework, and they broke out the calculator and did it. I'm not going to break out the calculator and do it here, but I would submit to you that that number, way less than the numbers that they are saying make no difference in this case. Numerically insignificant. I asked the doctor, what percentage of people does this affect? He said, I couldn't even tell you. It's that low. Of those millions of people, we said, point us to one person that has done something similar to this, or any violent actions created a murder out of somebody that was suffering from this depersonalization. Give us one known case of it. Did you hear any? Because it doesn't happen. It didn't happen in this occasion either. Name a single study that involved a 15-year-old of this where they suffered from depersonalization. Couldn't do it. And I would submit to you, if this is being used for acne medicine, there are far more 15-year-old people that are being prescribed this medicine than there would be 40-year-old adults. And if it ain't happening, if it isn't being reported, it's not being reported because it's not happening in 15-year-old people, and there's no significance to that in this case, I would submit to you. They said, well, what about buildup in the system? And the reason that became an issue is because when you talk about the studies, in all of those 2 to 40 people, the testimony was it was very quick onset, within 2 days generally. And we know that the defendant was on it for about a year with no instances of this. So they said, well, but could it have built up in his system? Where's a study that shows that this drug builds up in the system and creates depersonalization? Zero evidence of that. You were presented with none. It's important because this is the Hail Mary that they want to hang their hat on to say, it wasn't really his fault. He's accepting responsibility, but give him this mitigation because it wasn't really his fault, because it was the drug that really made him do it. Seems incongruent to me. Was there any evidence of depersonalization? I would submit to you no, and there is a ton of evidence to show that it wasn't depersonalization, and we're going to walk through some of that stuff. The pathway to violence in context. When you look at what that pathway of violence was in those steps, I would submit to you to look at the evidence that you have here. And I would argue with you for most, if not all, of those things that are on that pathway, there is evidence to support it. We know that he committed this violence. But remember, the pathway to violence studies are a predictive study in efforts to prevent it from happening. That's not where, we can't prevent this from happening in this case. We know what has happened in this case. Evidence of the depersonalization, or lack thereof. Look at the contents of the notes, and we're going to walk through that. He knew what was going on. He is making sense in there. The things that the doctor has latched onto, I would submit to you, are not accurate when you look at what's really going on in that note. Look at this history of planning, the internet searches that he has gone through. And of particular note are and I think Dr. Corbin, at least to some degree, started to agree with this idea. You know, the generalized searches of violence are one thing, but the specific searches, okay, there may be something there. Well, look at what the defendant was looking at in that phone and the specific things that he looked at in his inquisitive mind to figure out how to do and what he actually accomplished. And we'll walk through those, but the specific searches about the injuries to his brother, about what happens when you stab somebody with with a knife, like his brother. Would people hear you if you shoot somebody inside the house? What are the most deadly places to shoot someone? From a trauma surgeon? What's the deadliest rounds to use? How much does it weigh to carry 100 shells of shotgun shells? He searches 4 to 5 different, more than that maybe even, known convicted mass bombers and shooters who evaded capture for months on end while doing what? Hiding in the woods. These are very specific things that he is learning about and then putting into action. And he ain't learning about them the day that he does this. This is not a reactive thing. This is a planned course of action that he took and thought out and researched how to do. And he even changes courses, I would submit to you. He's researching the bombs. He's researching, I would submit to you, he's researching robbing banks, other things like that, trying to figure out where he's going to make a name for himself. Because when you look at the search histories, a common thread in his search history is, what are the most deadly? Who was the youngest to do this? Who's the youngest bank robber? Who's the youngest mass shooter? Who's the most deadly mass shooter? Who stole the most money from a bank? It's about notoriety and fame and being the best. Wants to have that best. And that bears out when you look at what the teachers told you. He was the one who wanted to know everything. He's the one that wanted to share that. Even if the chaplain didn't want to admit it today, I would argue that you can infer that from him in the back of the book wanting to be the one with the answers at that time. It goes into something else that the doctor said about depersonalization. Well, he was walking. Why wouldn't he take any steps to hide his face? Because he wants to do this. And he ultimately knows the outcome. He's not trying to get away. He thinks at the end of this he's going to die. If you're going to die, why do you need to cover your face? You don't. So, again, the thing that they latch onto to get to this farthest reaching thing that everyone will agree is the most rare occurrence out of this, don't add up. When you look at them, they add up to show you he knew exactly what he was doing at the time. So you look at that, you look at the internet searches, you look at the videos. We talked about that, and I'm going to show them again, but the doctor even tries to say, well, I'm not even sure there was somebody out there that he was talking to. We know there was somebody out there that he was talking to because the detectives told you, we found that person. There was nothing out of that, but they didn't have much to add other than that. And when you watch that video, what's he doing? He's furthering the plan to try and get away after running down into the woods and hiding and doing all these things to evade the police for over 45 minutes before he's found. And you saw and heard this was the largest police response that any of these detectives and police officers could remember in recent times. This is not a normal crime that has occurred here. They are doing everything they can to find that defendant while he is on the loose and this neighborhood is terrorized for 45 minutes. He's pointing, he says, they're shooting back over there. And the question was, well, why wouldn't that guy think it was weird that this person comes up? Well, it's a wooded area, and the kid's wearing camouflage with a shotgun. He looks like a hunter. In fact, maybe that's why he's not wearing a face mask, because it's more suspicious if he's wearing a face mask. You can't really pass off as an innocent 15-year-old hunter when you're trying to get away from the police at that point. So these attempts to flee, he discusses the consequences in his note. He discusses the consequences with Google. He's on this drug for over a year with zero interactions negatively with it. And then you consider all the choices and considerations that he makes while he's walking around. You heard from multiple people that the defendant, when he is going through, he makes decisions about who to shoot. He doesn't shoot. And when you watch the video, there are people out and about. There's kids out there walking by. And on one of the videos, I would submit to you, those kids hear and see what's going on. That's why one of the kids starts screaming for the other kid, because you hear the gunshots go off, and then you hear the kid calling for the other kid in a screaming way. And in one of the videos, you hear gunshots, and you see kids dispersing in the far off fielded area. He's making choices. He points the gun at Nathan Poole. He doesn't shoot because he's got this shotgun that he has researched and knows the distances of that are most deadly. All of the killings that he does are close up, in person, and on his path to safety in the woods so he can carry out whatever the next portion of the plan is. And we know there's a next portion of the plan because when you look at what he's searching, he wants there to be more. If this was the end of the plan, he wouldn't have had hundreds of rounds of shotgun shells, three extra magazines for a 9mm. He wouldn't have reloaded the gun multiple times as he's walking through, carrying out this action. This isn't somebody who picked up the water and poured it in, or the coffee and poured it in the thing that they thought was a cup and wasn't a cup in their hand. This is somebody who knows what's happening and is carrying out a complex plan in their mind to make it to the woods to avoid capture. He's taken with him things to survive, $700+. He's taken with him multiple pieces of food and water, fire starters, self-care things, multiple things of contact lenses, pockets full of ammunition, fishing line, flint starters, a change of clothes, deodorant, toilet paper. He was going out to survive in the woods like Eric Rudolph and his other heroes that he had researched over a course of time. And it bears out by the reliable and physical, observable, tangible evidence in this case, not fanciful theories and unproven experiments that they don't even want to sign on to in this court of law, because they know that it's not accurate, I would submit to Your Honor. Because if they really believed that's what the case was and that the evidence supported it, why wouldn't they put it in their report that that is their opinion? So these are maybes, unproven experiments versus verifiable, tangible, observable evidence. So let's talk about Dr. Sapia today. She doesn't sign on to this depersonalization. They say, well, that wasn't your goal. But she told you she heard the testimony. She didn't say she agreed with that determination. She reviewed all the same things. She has the same credentials. If she had a concern or question about depersonalization, why doesn't she write in there, I think that it's not my job to determine this, but I have serious concerns that he was suffering from depersonalization? Because the other two wouldn't sign off on it either. She discusses, for the most part, generalized brain development for a youth. And it's interesting, and when you look at the cases, and I know Your Honor has and will, when you look at the cases on all of these things, you can kind of determine that that's not enough here. when you start looking at the determination. It's certainly something for you to consider, but it's not the be-all, end-all of this. And she admits to Your Honor that this is a spectrum of young people. You know, there are very immature people who have very poor impulse control, and there are young people who have good impulse control and are very mature. But it seems like when you listen to her testimony, she tries to default to the lower end of that spectrum, as opposed to saying, you know, the evidence in this case indicates that the defendant was on the better end of that, the more mature end of that. When you look at all the people that talk about him, every single person, to a person, he was very intelligent. He was goal-oriented. He knew how to do what he needed to do to get along, to move it to the next thing, to get to be able to play video games. He was smart enough to bypass computer systems to get to the games while he's in school. He is able to essentially fend for themselves for several hours a day. We let 15-year-olds drive cars and learn how to drive cars for a reason. He's not a 10-year-old that we're talking about here. He's a 15-year-old young man at this point who is on the mature end of that, I would submit, at least publicly, that he is showing responsibility. His parents felt that he was so mature, they left 13 or 11 guns unsecured in the home because we trust that he knows how to handle himself around firearms. No concerns about that. So, when you're looking at this spectrum, I would submit to you again, she's shading it to one end without any real reason to shade it to that end of the lower end of maturity here. It was interesting to me when she was talking about the reasons for concern for young people is that their actions are so reactive. They are she listed like 3 factors that were things that she said, you know, they can make good decisions if these are the factors that are in place. And she listed each of those factors. I remember at least 2 of them, I think. I don't have my notes about her in front of me, but it was one of the big ones for her was peer pressure and impulse, a reason for impulse control here. When you look at what those reasons, and I know you took great notes, when you look at what the reasons she listed were, for reasons that could exist that a young person would make good decisions and not be reactive, every one of them applied to the defendant on October the 13th. There is 0 peer pressure on him to do this. He was not in a highly emotional state from all testimony that you heard. And when you look at the history of all of this, it's not him so out there, emotionally reacting like a second-degree type of murder type thing. This is a thought-out, methodical process that today was the day, for whatever reason, he was going to put that plan into motion. He researched the exact actions that he took. That's not reactive. That is proactive. Dr. Sapia, never even looked at all the evidence in the case. And she's the one who's supposed to tell you, in her opinion, he's going to benefit from all these factors that you need to consider later on. And she hasn't even reviewed all of the documents. She talked to the kid for 2.5 hours and read his medical records, didn't watch these videos, didn't look at the phone searches, said, I'm generally aware of them, but I didn't spend any time looking through them. I mean, everybody says nobody knew what was going on in his mind. We have tangible documentation about what was going on in his mind because, you know, they used to say the eyes are the window into the soul. I think in 2026 it's probably the cell phone is the window into your soul, okay? I mean, you look at your deepest, darkest secrets are on your cell phone. We see it every day in this courtroom and in this courthouse, right? That's where people tell the truth. They may not tell the truth to mom. They may not tell the truth to dad, to their friends, to their internet friends. Google sure knows the truth about us because We're not smart enough not to Google things that we're really thinking about and considering. And if you look at his Google history, it's all in there. She didn't care to look at it. She could have had it, she could have asked for it, but she didn't. And she comes in here and gives you an opinion that she wants you to base a decision off of that I would submit to you is half-cooked, because you're not looking at the totality of the circumstances. Bad information in, lack of information in, bad information out. And they want you to make a very important decision with half information, I would submit to you. They continue to talk about his continued improvement, and I would submit to you, you heard Dr. Corvin talking about this, and you heard Dr. Sapia talking about this, and their prognoses seem to be very different to me. Dr. Corvin described how brutal these things were, this injury was, and he's not going to fully recover. He blew half his brain out, I think he wanted to say at some point. The catastrophic injuries. He'll never be the same person that he was then. Dr. Sapia, well, the brain's malleable. I think, the breaks, he's going to continue to improve. But she can't say that for sure. She says, it's trended that way. But what way is it trending? It's trending in a very controlled, kid glove type environment for this person, okay, which is not where he's going to be moving forward. Bad information in, bad information out. One of the things she held on to tight when questioned about it was, well, we know he hadn't had any issues with impulse control or being interested in these sorts of things since then. He's been improving. But she told you, when she met with him, she noted impulse control. We're 3 years later, yeah, he's improved, but he's still not even back to what he was at 15-year-old Austin. But they want you to say, no, I'm going to trust that he's going to improve and benefit great enough from being in custody and receiving the treatment while he's in there. Okay. But I would also ask you to consider what Casey Clark said to you. This is what a 15-year-old without training and very little experience is able to do. Imagine what a 45-year-old is able to do if he's not sentenced to what the state's asking for. And a 25-year-old, I've got it here. I said his brake fluid's always going to be low because they keep using the brake analogy through the doctor. What damage is done to this frontal cortex that is catastrophic, that is the thing that controls your impulse control, which he clearly already had an issue with. If you listen to them, by going out and doing this action, he obliterates that part of his brain, but he's going to be fine moving forward. It doesn't make sense, I would submit to you. Yes, he's growing, he's aging, and he's a different person than he was then in some regards. But when you look at what we know, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future, he is still interested in the same types of things that he was then. He just has less access to it now. And she hung her hat, Dr. Sapia did, on he hasn't been in any trouble since he's been in custody, and they presented that to you multiple times, an argument and through several witnesses. But when the one witness was on the stand yesterday and I cross-examined her on it, and I didn't know what she was going to say when I asked her the question. I said, and I asked the question because that's how it's been presented. He's been a good behaved person while he's been in custody, right? And she went, for the most part. And I said, well, why do you hesitate on that? And she gave you various things that were of concern to her. And I would ask you, think about those things that she talked about. He's throwing things and getting into altercations to some degree with people on the basketball court. Whenever has to be corrected, he's mumbling under his breath, angry about it, I would submit to you, doing what he has to do, putting his mask on to go along to get along until he can get to his tablet because he doesn't want to lose his tablet and watch his movies and eat his Subway sandwiches and get his phone privileges. I'm going to do what I got to do when I'm called down on it. And then they're watching this show, and she has to write him up to some degree because he says that he wants to be the one to put her in some sort of a choke hold or ninja hold. And yeah, it was started out as a joke with other people, but when he said that, she felt concerned enough that she needed to report that down. He's showing you who he is. Believe him. When someone shows you who they are finally, they take that mask off, take their word for it. Believe them. So what are the observable evidence? And again, I'm going to go through this because I've added a lot of things here, but this is the phone history that is of no concern to the experts here, right? Look at the things, and this is just a smattering of it. This is from January of 2020. Remember, he got his phone Christmas Day coming into this. So the EI time, January 1st, he's already looking up rifles for sale near him and 9mm near him, magazines near him. The second day, all school shootings done with a pistol. This is before he's on this medicine, mind you. Then you go on down 4 days into the month. Name of the Virginia Tech shooter. Virginia Tech shooting. When was the Virginia Tech shooting? What gun was used in the Nevada middle school shooting? Which gun was used in the Indiana middle school shooting? What gun was used in Virginia Beach shooting? That same day. Worst shootings ever in North Carolina. Worst mass shootings in North Carolina history. Carthage nursing home shooting. 38 caliber images. You move on here. What is the motive behind the Stone Douglas High School? Who invented school? Some addresses, the differences between guns, a middle school, how many rounds were fired in Parkland shooting, gas chamber images, just a smattering of the searches. You have it before you. Keep going, and still in that first month. How to get somebody's IP address. He's smart. Making explosive box. Materials for making explosives. Explosive material. Acetone. How many human trafficking. How many percentage of gun deaths with illegal guns. Middle school shooting was the deadliest. Deadliest high school shooting. Deadliest middle school shooting. How many people died at Westside Middle School shooting? A speed loader for a gun. Amazon gift cards. Ruger 54. How many rounds fired at Virginia Tech Stadium? Worst school shootings with handguns. Then he looks up a handgun for sale near him. Then you move into July through September. Another school shooting. How many people did Eric Rudolph kill? Bombers. Rifle was used by that killer. More rifles. What caliber do snipers use? How fast can a bullet travel? What bombing and shooting spree on July 22? The differences between buckshot and double-aught buck. Will number 2 shotgun shells kill a human? Then he goes into the Parkland shootings. Assault weapons deaths. Most mass shootings with illegal weapons. Again, we're back to Eric Rudolph, who, as Your Honor, I'm sure is aware, hiding out in the woods after he commits mass murders. We're on the Eric Rudolph train. What evidence do they have against Eric Rudolph? Is he still alive? What prison is he in? How is dynamite created? Starts looking into dynamite and things further. Is it illegal to have guns in school or guns in your room? He continues on with lots of searches. Searches for Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop. Yes, he was a hunter. But why is that important? When you look at his note, is it consistent that he might go to Cabela's to steal weapons or to steal ammunition? Can a minor buy a rifle? Can a minor possess a handgun? Fascination with these sorts of things. Then you're back on to bombings, Vegas shootings, Timothy McVeigh, ammonium nitrate, ISIS road bombs. How many shooters were in Las Vegas? Where in the mountains was Eric Rudolph hiding? Which serial killer are you? Serial killer that killed for the thrill. Serial killer that killed for fun. January of 21, more dynamite. Again, what gun is used? More bomb-making materials, more bomb-making stuff. Ammonium nitrate, ratios, cups to gallons. How many cups are in 8 ounces? Fuel, which fuel per gallon? Researching, how do I create bombs? And I'd submit to you, he's fascinated with these bombs. That's the goal. And then he realizes, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do the bomb thing. I'm not going to be able to do the bank robbery thing. I've got guns. Let's transition to that philosophy, which I'm already interested in, and that's how I'm going to make my name for myself. That's how I'm going to move forward with my mass shooting. Again, more weapons-based or more bomb-based materials. Abortion clinics near me. Now we're in October of 21. Is AK-47 a terrorist weapon? Starts looking up killings here. How many murders were solved in North Carolina? How much is the sentence for prostitution? We're not saying that he was prostituting himself, but let's be honest, what goes hand in hand together? Crimes like this, and I would submit to you interest in sexual deviant type things. I'm not saying that he was a sexual deviant, but those are interests that I think it's clear in the world that these types of people who commit mass shootings and things are interested in. Forensic files, TV shows, persons in North Carolina shot with rifle and murder. He starts looking up 12-gauge shotguns, minimum sentences. Again, this is important when you move on to your factors about what can you consider. Again, we're looking at robbing banks, the types of weapons that he can have. Can I buy a machine gun? Accessories. We're moving on. Again, we're at Cabela's. And if you go back and look at the search history and the things that he was looking at, he's in shopping at Cabela's. It would appear that one of the favorite places for him. Is a slug or buckshot more lethal? How many people died in Tiananmen? What ammo does the military use for shotguns? None of this was concerning to the doctor. I would submit to you it should be concerning to anybody that's looking at this when you've got a 15-year-old looking at these sorts of things, even at this level, and this isn't everything. So again, I mean, you can see it, police codes, robbing banks. What is the statute of limitations for attempted murder? Now we're in August of 22. We're back in the school shootings. Mom and dad stabbed to death. Mass shooter hates humans. Important when you look at the note in just a couple minutes. He's ramping up at this point when you start looking at the things that we're talking about. This usacrime.com, when you look at the searches of what he's looking at on there, it's video after video after video, story after story of violence. He starts looking at, I'm assuming that's supposed to be Molotov cocktails, voice box in the throat. Can someone talk when their voice box is code? It's foreshadowing. Looking up what he's going to do. What is the average response time for an SRO to a shooting? How to counter thermal imaging, school shootings. Eric Freen, another mass shooter who shot up a barracks in Pennsylvania, evaded the police for 30, 40 days while hiding where? In the woods. Can juveniles get the death penalty? Consequences. When is he looking at that? 2 months before he goes and commits his mass murders, his spree shooting. September of 2022, we're back here. We're looking at silent ways to kill people with a knife, scanners, active shooter police code, homicidal ideation. Is there a silent way to kill someone? Why do white males kill themselves more often in the U.S.? Pistols, pistols. Youngest cop killer in history. How long does it take for someone to die from a knife? How fast will a gun kill when it hits vital organs? When do the leaves fall from a tree in Raleigh? How many times did the Uvalde shooter's mother? A bunch of searches about that. Can you hear a gunshot from inside someone's house? Do people scream when being stabbed in the neck? Do people scream when being stabbed? How long does a bullet-proof vest last for? Start searching those types of things. How much does 100 shotgun shells weigh? You heard he had hundreds of shotgun shells that he carried in a 22-pound backpack. Again, he's looking at extension tubes. How fast do officers respond to shootings? How fast does a .22 have to go to penetrate the skull? I mean, this isn't a red flag. Why do we need to know banks near the high school, right? Right after you've searched, how much ammo do guerrilla warfares carry? Uvalde Elementary School. Who killed the most people ever solo? Mass shooters who hated society. Worst school massacre in the world. Toxic masculinity. Kid found dead. Guns. Deadly school massacres. Now we're finally in October. He's never been interested in the environment. Well, he's got a lot of searches, and these are just a few, because when you go back through, there's a lot of searches about hurricanes. I would submit to you he's a hunter. Hunters tend to care about conservation and the environment. It's not out of the realm of possibility that that's something that he latched on to. Do police chase suspect policies? Why is that important? Do they go in the woods by themselves to pursue someone? How deadly is double-aught buckshot? I mean, talks about dry ammo. Why is that important? Because then he goes and uses Ziploc bags to keep his ammunition. I would submit he's learning, he's keeping his ammunition dry, moving forward. Easier to carry it that way. On the day of, during the event, he's searching himself, trying to figure out what's going on, where are they, so he knows where he can be, where to go. He's following his own greatest hits. He's seeing what's going on and knowing that these people are around him. And this is right after he's searching, do the police go in the woods for an armed suspect a couple of days before, right? Why is that important? What does it mean to hate society a couple of days before? He's thinking about these things. It's not a sudden onset. It's not a reaction. These are things that don't have EI times, but Dylan, look at all these. These are all mass killers. Attempted sentences in North Carolina. Silent ways to kill. More bombs. Statutes of limitations. Breaking in. Lockpick sets. Addresses. This is a whole section about homemade suppressors for firearms. This is, Dr. Corvin talked about it, the desensitization. He even agreed that, yes, you can become desensitized. Look at the types of things that he's looking at. Cartel members. Vicious attack on road rage in Brazil. Bleeds to death, stabbed in neck. Man shot in head in front of daughters. Executed shot head, Brazil. Stabbed death love affair. Dismembered Brazil motorcycle. Girl beaten, punished, betraying fellow gang members. Desensitization ramping up for someone who clearly has a predilection or an interest in these types of things that we know then goes and acts upon them. How many years is a life sentence without parole? So let's talk about the notes that don't make any sense but weirdly make a lot of sense when you spend time with them. It has the correct date. This is more well written than his homework assignment was, I would submit to you. And look here, mass shooters who hated society, mass shooter hates humans, humans destroying the earth, Well, this doesn't make any sense. Why would he be interested in that? Oh, it's the exact thing that he writes in his letter. He stabbed him, and he stopped breathing about 10 to 15 minutes later. We know that his voice box was cut. Does he address his mental status? He addresses it here. I'm not suicidal. I was never bullied or anything. And I'm not going to... I don't know the answer to this, but I'll bring it to the court's attention. One of the concerns was misspelled words because it doesn't make any sense. He misspelled by. Well, let's read this sentence in a different way. I was never bullied or anything by Dad. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Especially when the next sentence is, I don't like you, Mom. He addresses the consequences are considered. I don't want to die, but it's going to happen anyhow. He's doing the things that you are going to be... He's considering the exact same things that you are going to be asked to consider to a degree when you look at the statute in this case. He's addressing his mental state. He's addressing whether he knew the consequences of his actions. He addresses his motivation. He killed him because he would get in the way. It makes perfect sense. And I would submit to you the reason that maybe that's not a misspelled word on the front, the word by, is because he then says, you were the best dad. And then he says, I was never bullied in school either. So grammatically, I wasn't bullied by you, Dad. You were the best, Dad. I wasn't bullied in school either. And he addresses that to who? A relevant audience, the police. He even shows you his lack of remorse. I have no regrets. He addresses his mental health at the time of this. I am not mental. I was sane when I did this. When someone tells you, believe, it appears, I would submit to you, the doctors just don't want to accept the fact that maybe he knew what was going on and was being honest with us. None of us want to accept the fact that a 15-year-old would do something like this. But I think we are all becoming more and more aware that sadly this is the state of the world that we're living in, and it's the state of this country that we're living in. And thoughts and prayers are only going to go so far if we refuse to admit that people do things like this because they know what they're doing and have acted upon it. He gives a very specific thing by tearing off this corner and saying, James is dead, don't look inside, and placing it at a very specific, thought-out, well-reasoned place in the home, and leaves the cartridge case that he used in that instance right with it. It makes sense. This letter makes sense. He tells you the Google search. It's right here. We know he shoots him in the back of the head. We know why he does it. He says he stole it from Cabela's. Is that so insane since we know that he frequents Cabela's website? He's very interested in Cabela's. It's not. It's logical. It's coherent. This letter makes perfect sense no matter how much they want to distance themselves, the doctors, from that letter making sense. This is the handwriting on that schoolwork. That's in a calm, collected environment of school. And we want to say that this is the handiwork of a rushed, crazed person. This is somebody who took their time, thought out and explained why. Wrote a relatively neat note for him in his handwriting when you consider it against the other known things that you have for his handwriting. Now, the actions of the person, the videos. Is that a zombied man, or is that a young man that knows what he's doing and is acting like a military person, approaching people in a sneak attack from behind? He sees his target, he crouches and runs towards them and attacks them. He knew what he was doing. I don't have to show you this whole video again. I'll skip through it for time's sake, but you remember this is the video where he runs across here. It's not somebody that is kind of just doesn't know what they're doing or walking. This is him. This is that child walking. And moments later, Austin comes walking by, jogging by to kill Gabe Torres in that cul-de-sac. He's running through the neighborhood. He's not strolling. Yeah, he strolls when he gets here. And let's talk about that hunched over appearance that they wanted to latch onto when you look at some of these things. What makes more sense? He's depersonalized at this point and walking like a zombie, or he's the little guy that we've seen and heard that he is, and he's got a 22-pound book bag on him full of weapons and ammunition and a big shotgun, and he's loaded down with ammo in his pockets. Maybe that's why he's moving slowly and hunched over. It's not because he doesn't know what's going on. It's because he packed a lot of stuff, and it's a long walk 2.5 miles through the woods where he's going. Again, is this a person?
There's a shooter over there. There's a shooter over there.
Seems like he knows what he's doing there to me. I would submit to you. Now let's talk about the law and life without parole for a person under the age of 18. You're allowed to do that so long as you consider the defendant's youth and you have discretion. That's it. And I know you know this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think it is important to note, especially with the emergence of the case law as it goes, what is not required. You are not required to find that the defendant is permanently incorrigible, is irreparably corrupt, or even if he has potential for redemption. You don't even have to inquire about those things. When you look at the case law in this, what is important is you have to look at, does the crime reflect irreparable corruption and incorrigibility? Does the crime, and when you look at all the case law about it, it talks about that. It says you don't have to consider is the defendant, you don't have to make a finding. You can make a finding, and I'd submit to you in this case, you can make a finding that he is irreparably corrupt and permanently incorrigible. I think there's sufficient evidence to substantiate that here, but you don't have to do that. We've reserved this for the rarest of crimes, but the case law says that if you go through these things and you determine, based on our Miller Fix statute, that he deserves a life sentence without parole, that you can give him that, and this in and of itself, by going through this analysis, you have made the required inquiry in consideration. Ask yourself, is this a 10-year-old who threw a rock at somebody and hit him in the head and they died? Is this a 10-year-old that decided they wanted to go rob a store? Is this a 12-year-old? Is this a 16-year-old that decided they wanted to do that? It's not. This is a calculated, mature 15-year-old who committed one of the deadliest spree shootings in this state, who knew what he was doing. But we'll walk through these things a little bit, Your Honor. The age at the time, and again, none of these things have to have any specific weight assigned to them, even if you find that they exist. You could find all of them and still determine that he is required to have a life sentence. And is it life without parole, or do you think that this young man needs to have, after 25 years, the ability to be someone in this room's neighbor or whatever, live up the street from them, and we can trust that he is reformed and not going to be this person that he was at 15 and that I would submit he still is. But his age at the time, again, he's not a 10-year-old, he's not a 13-year-old, he was 15 at the time. That's just 2 years short of life mandatory. And you can find that he's a juvenile. If he wasn't a juvenile, we wouldn't be having to go through this process. So I would submit to you there is no mitigating significance to that prong. His level of maturity or immaturity, in looking at this, I looked at some cases that kind of gave some guidance, and State v. McCord, there were some findings that were made and the court upheld them, and it said that it can manifest itself in impetuousness and impulsive acts. But in that case, the judge found that the defendant had made a plan and modified that plan multiple times, and that was sufficient to undercut this theory, and the Court of Appeals has upheld that. I would tell you here, we've talked about this plan, we've talked about the iterations of the plan, we've talked about everyone here saying how mature he was as a youth, and that there is no specific evidence that the defendant suffered from any specific immaturity at the time that would mitigate his decision. And that's the standard that was used by the court in the Borlase case, and that there was no evidence of impulsive action. We've gone through those reasons why. He was trusted to have firearms. He's independent, self-starter, given lots of freedoms, still is. No mitigating significance, I would submit to you, by his level of immaturity. In fact, I would submit to you it works against him in this case. The ability to appreciate the risks and consequences. We know that he appreciated them at the time because we're in a rare position where we have looked into the window of his internet searches and he has Googled the exact thing and consequence of the action that he is going to go do. He is apprised of it, and he still goes and does it. It's hard to say otherwise. The courts in McCord talked about the defendant in that case taking steps to minimize their chances of being caught, indicating an understanding and ability to appreciate. We've talked about it here. He entered into the thick, heavy woods and evaded police for at least 45 minutes before he sneak attacked on them in the woods again. He understood what was going on. He appreciated the consequences when he wrote the possible outcome, what he viewed as the inevitable outcome of this in his note. He appreciated it and tried to effectuate it when he shot himself in the forehead with that shotgun. He knew the consequences. He talked about them. He knew the consequences of his actions of leaving the body in the bathroom of his brother. And we know that because he left a note saying, "Don't go in there, James is dead," appreciating the consequences of his action there. And we know that because it's in his own words. He's told us who he is. Trust him when he shows you that. His intellectual capacity, how is this even a question at this point for this person when all of the witnesses have told you 3.8 GPA, he's smart enough to research all of this, inquisitive, he's so inquisitive, he's able to bypass computers, he's able to conceal his plans in chapstick. It's this brilliant disguise that he's kept up for years, that he let his mask down when he thought, okay, it's going to be over at the end of this. I don't have to hide this anymore. He was smart enough to keep it all a secret until he decided to act on it. No mitigating significance. I would argue it works against him. His prior record, he doesn't have one. But given the facts and circumstances of the crime, given the fact that the crime shows this incorrigible behavior, I would submit minimal, if any, mitigating circumstances here. We have many first offenders that are spending the rest of their life in prison without the possibility of parole. The next, mental health status. Again, There's zero evidence that he suffered from any mental debilitating injury at the time. Everybody seems to think he knew what was going on as far as his mental health in the months leading up to this. There's maybe this question about depersonalization at the time. I would submit to you that's been debunked and should not apply. This works against him. I would submit this is not a mitigating factor for him. Same with familial or peer pressure. There is none here. In fact, there's the opposite. The opposite being the peer pressure that would have been exerted upon him was James. When he told you James would try to stop me, and so that's why I killed him. So again, no mitigating value in this, I would submit to the court. This is one that I think you have to answer, right? I mean, is there a likelihood that the defendant would benefit from rehabilitation in confinement? I would submit to you, I think that everybody would benefit from rehabilitation if they're given services at that point in time. It's to what degree are we talking about here? Remember, this is a person, and when you looked at the McCord case, it's a different situation because that was a resentencing on a Miller hearing, and the person had been in prison for many years, and they were able to go back and review what they had done while they were in custody, and they said it was a benefit to them to be able to do that. You have a little bit of that here, I would submit, and it's not as they would prescribe it or pretend that it is. I mean, yes, day to day he is going about his business and reaching this gold level status, but that's what he was doing before, until he wasn't. He goes along to get along to effectuate the goal that he has. The goal he has now is to lay low and stay out of trouble so that he can keep watching movies and keep eating Subway sandwiches and having the benefits of the phone calls. He's not going to have that goal when he's in DAC. The goal he had before was lay low, do my homework so I can get to these video games, get to my internet videos, do the things that I want to do, and then ultimately act upon them. The impulse control issues, I would submit to you, are irreparably damaged for him. He's never going to be 100% in that regard. That's what I understand all the doctors to say, even if Dr. Sapia maybe doesn't go that far. She doesn't not say that. She says, I don't know. The evidence is trending that way, but I don't know, because you never do. I would argue with you, to the court, that he has been in. We have that history to know. Has he changed? He's still interested in the same types of things. And I found it of note of the things that he is consuming and fixated on while he is in custody, and what he has told their investigators in this, and what his family has shared. Think about the things that he was consuming that we just saw, and think about the things that he is still consuming or interested in. He is interested in ammunition, guns, and violent things still. You have the Scuffles, or the violent television show where he reacts with the comment to the person who is in charge of his custody and care. You have the basketball court issue. You have I think they described it as the smart mouth that he still has, or has now, that maybe he was better at hiding then than he is now. Violent media consumption. The books that he's reading are still this type of thing. He is, and I think it's in one of the documents that we presented to you, but there's this conversation about Nintendo Switches and him getting agitated about a Nintendo Switch with his mother. There's these comments about professions and the comments about the family life that he makes. The Darwin Awards that he's been provided with, I mean, we heard what those are about. And then he goes out of his way to ask the worker who's interviewing him about 2 movies, Of all the movies in the world that he can ask about at that time, he asks about 2 movies. He asks about Civil War, and he asks about warfare. Now, this is a person who is in custody for killing 5 people, and his impulse control is such at that point that he is unable or unwilling or doesn't realize that he's doing it to seek that information out from an outside source to find out about those 2 things. He's not asking about whatever's on the Disney Channel or whatever's on ABC. He's seeking out those 2 types of things. It's instructive for you trying to look forward. So may there be some benefit to him. I'm not going to deny that there would be benefit to him being in custody and trying to be rehabilitated to some degree. Would he benefit from that? But to what degree? And to a degree that we should choose that option over life in prison without the possibility of parole, I would submit to you there's not enough mitigating significance there. Finally, any other thing in mitigation, I think the only thing you can really talk about here would be that drug consumption argument. He's found God apparently while in custody, but it sounded like he had God in his life beforehand. When you talk about he went to Sunday school every day, and now he's kind of back to where he was doing those sorts of things. So is that really a change? Is that really something that mitigates this? I would submit to you it's not. We've already talked about why I don't think the depersonalization is appropriate here. And so when you look at all those mitigating factors versus this idea of this crime and what he did to those people and to those people who were out here, his family, who sat up here and told you, I could stand here and try to tell you and recount those things. They did it better than I could ever try to attempt and inform Your Honor about the effects of this. Even his parents' lives are ruined. This is a tragedy all the way around. But it's not an unavoidable tragedy, and it wasn't an unavoidable tragedy then. It was a tragedy that he chose to inflict upon all of these people, including his own family. And he has not shown, and there's not enough evidence to show here, that that contradicts this idea that one of the deadliest shootings and a terrorization of a neighborhood to where you've seen hundreds of officers testify, you saw their reactions. This is a different case, and it is a different type of scenario than you would normally face. This is not the transient properties of youth manifesting themselves. This is the defendant showing you who he was at that time and acting upon it. And what that requires in this case is for you to sentence the defendant to every day that he possibly can serve in the Department of Adult Corrections. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.